The airplane hummed softly as passengers settled into their seats. Row 10 was almost quiet, except for the sound of a young woman slowly leaning her head against the window. She had boarded like everyone else, showed her ticket, smiled politely, and walked in without drawing attention. Nothing about her looked unusual, just another traveler moving from one city to another. But there was something hidden beneath that calm look. She wore simple clothes, nothing flashy, and carried only a small bag. Most people assumed she was a student or maybe someone visiting family. Nobody guessed she carried a secret that connected her to a life very different from the world of everyday travelers. The cabin lights dimmed, passengers pulled out magazines, headphones, or simply closed their eyes. In row 10, the young woman's breathing slowed as sleep found her. For her, sleep on flights was not new. She had trained herself to rest anywhere, anytime, because in her past life every chance to sleep had mattered. The engines roared louder as the plane climbed higher. Outside, the clouds stretched like endless fields. The captain's voice came through the speakers, calm and steady, welcoming everyone on board. He mentioned the weather, the cruising altitude, and the expected arrival time. No one imagined that hours later, that same calm voice would shake the cabin with words no passenger expected. For now, the flight was peaceful. A family in row 9 played cards quietly. 2 businessmen in row 11 discussed their laptops. A child further back pressed her face to the window and whispered at the clouds. Life in the air seemed normal. Every detail looked like an ordinary journey. The young woman's dreams, however, were far from ordinary. In her sleep, she saw flashes of memory, deserts where heat rose like fire, long nights with no stars, engines rumbling beneath her feet. She saw her hands gripping controls, eyes fixed on the horizon. Her body remembered the weight of a helmet, the pressure of oxygen tubes, the steady vibration of wings cutting through the sky. She shifted slightly in her seat, but no one noticed. It had been years since she left that life. A life where she had been more than just another passenger. She had once been a combat pilot, trained to fly in the most dangerous skies, trained to respond to alarms, to follow the captain's voice without hesitation, and to face fear not by running but by rising higher. But she had chosen to step away. She had left the uniform behind, left the adrenaline, the danger, and the heavy responsibility. She wanted quiet now, wanted to live among people who never had to think about dogfights or rescue missions. That's why she boarded this flight like anyone else, just hoping for silence and sleep. Yet destiny is not something you can escape easily. Sometimes the world finds a way to call you back. Even when you thought the chapter was closed, hours passed. The passengers stirred when the flight attendants rolled carts down the aisle. The smell of coffee and warm bread filled the cabin. The young woman in row 10 barely moved, still resting with her head against the window. She seemed at peace, and then, without warning, the captain's voice returned. But this time it carried a weight that cut through every conversation. "Attention, passengers," he began, his tone more urgent than before. "We have an emergency situation, and we need trained combat pilots on board." The words hit the cabin like a shockwave. People froze, cups stopped midway in hands, conversations ended mid-sentence. Combat pilots? On a commercial flight? The idea sounded impossible, yet the captain's voice was firm. There was no joke in his tone. In row 10, the young woman's eyes opened. Her calm expression shifted as her past reached out and shook her awake. She didn't move right away. Her heart pounded, her body remembered. It was as if every lesson, every drill, every mission came rushing back in an instant. Around her, passengers looked confused. Some glanced toward the cockpit door as if answers might appear there. Others whispered nervously, wondering if it was a security threat, an engine failure, or something no one wanted to name. The young woman breathed slowly, steadying herself. She had promised she was done with this life. But when a captain calls, when lives are at stake, when fear spreads through rows of strangers, what does someone like her do? She lifted her head from the window, her eyes focused straight ahead. Her life had been built on one truth. Sometimes you don't get to choose the quiet path, sometimes the sky calls you back. And in that moment, everyone in the cabin waited, not knowing that the quiet woman in row 10 might hold the answer they desperately needed. The cabin filled with silence after the captain's announcement. People looked at each other, trying to understand if they had really heard the words. Some laughed nervously, hoping it was a misunderstanding. But the seriousness in the captain's tone left no room for jokes. The young woman in row 10 sat straighter now, Her fingers gripped the armrest lightly. She didn't want attention, but the call had pierced something inside her. For years she had hidden from this part of herself, but the moment reminded her that no matter how far she traveled, she couldn't erase her training. The flight attendants hurried down the aisle. Their faces showed more than they said. They looked calm on the surface, but their quick steps and tight smiles betrayed urgency. One of them repeated the captain's request. "If anyone on board has combat pilot training, please make yourself known." No one spoke. A man in the front cleared his throat but said nothing. A woman near the back shook her head and whispered to her neighbor. Everyone's eyes seemed to search the rows, desperate to believe someone would stand up. The young woman looked down at her bag under the seat. Inside was nothing unusual, just a book, a water bottle, and a passport. Her old life was not in the bag. It was in her heart, in her bones. The muscles of her arms still remembered the weight of controls. The rhythm of her breathing still remembered the pressure of oxygen at high altitudes. She closed her eyes briefly, and for a moment she was back in the cockpit, but doubt rushed in. What if she stepped forward and it wasn't enough? What if she had forgotten too much? She had left this life behind for a reason. Her chest tightened, not from fear but from the conflict within. The captain's voice returned, this time sharper. "Ladies and gentlemen, I repeat, if there is anyone with combat flight experience, please identify yourself immediately. This is critical." Passengers began to murmur. Why do they need a combat pilot? Is it a threat? What's happening? The air was heavy with questions. The flight attendants avoided specifics, but their urgency was clear. The young woman finally released the armrest and stood. Her movement was quiet, but in the stillness of the cabin it drew every eye. People turned to watch as she stepped into the aisle. She didn't say much, just looked at the nearest flight attendant and nodded. Relief spread across the attendant's face. She whispered quickly, "Please come with me. The captain needs you." The words confirmed what the passengers feared. This wasn't a drill or an accident, it was real and it was dangerous. As the woman in row 10 walked toward the cockpit, whispers followed her. "She's a pilot. Do you think she can help?" "What's going on?" Some faces showed hope, others showed fear, but in that moment, she carried all their expectations on her shoulders. Inside, her mind replayed the countless drills she had once done. She remembered her instructors shouting through radios, her fellow pilots signaling from other cockpits, the endless hours of training. It was all coming back piece by piece, as if her body had been waiting for this call. When she reached the cockpit door, the attendant tapped gently and opened it. The space inside was filled with blinking lights and the tight air of tension. The captain turned, his face pale but controlled. "Thank you for coming," he said quickly. "We don't have much time." She nodded, steady but quiet. "Tell me what's happening," she said. Her voice carried the calmness of someone who had faced storms before. The captain leaned closer, speaking low so passengers outside wouldn't hear. "We've detected something approaching our path. It's not a regular aircraft and ground control has lost contact. Our systems show signs it may not respond to normal signals if it's hostile. We'll need to take action." The words sank in like cold water. A commercial flight was never meant to face combat. But the world was unpredictable. Sometimes danger found you even in the sky. The young woman inhaled slowly. Her old instincts flared awake. She studied the radar, the blinking dots. The captain's tired eyes, every choice would matter. Every second would count behind her. The passengers sat waiting, unaware of the full truth. For them, she was just the quiet woman from row 10. But for the captain and crew, she was now something more. Someone who might stand between safety and disaster. Her decision was clear. She could no longer be just a passenger. The sky had called her back, and this time she couldn't turn away. The cockpit felt smaller than she remembered. The tight walls, the constant lights blinking, and the low hum of engines pressing through the metal. It all carried the weight of her past. She had once lived in spaces like this for hours, for days ready to act without hesitation. Now, the captain's eyes searched hers, looking for an answer he desperately needed. He pointed at the radar screen. A single dot moved strangely across it, not steady, not like the path of another commercial plane. It hovered too long, then jumped too quickly. The captain's voice was firm but shaken. "It's unpredictable, and it's heading toward us." Her heartbeat stayed steady, not racing, just locked into the rhythm she once knew. Her eyes scanned the instruments, calculating distance and speed. Every movement of that dot meant a possibility. She leaned closer and asked, "Have you tried contact?" The first officer nodded. "Yes, several times." No response. His hands tightened on the controls, trying to hide the unease. The young woman's gaze sharpened. She remembered countless moments where silence from the other side meant danger. It could mean equipment failure, or it could mean something worse. She didn't say it out loud, but she knew the captain was thinking the same. Behind the cockpit door, the passengers waited without answers. Some tried to stay calm, telling themselves it was only turbulence or routine trouble, but whispers traveled fast and fear grew quicker than truth. Parents held their children closer. Business travelers closed their laptops but couldn't relax. Everyone's mind returned to the strange words they had heard. Combat pilots in the cockpit. The captain lowered his voice. "If we have to make sudden maneuvers, we'll need your guidance. This isn't a fighter jet, but you know combat skies better than anyone here." Her eyes stayed on the screen. Watching the dot shift again, it was closer now, much closer. She spoke quietly, almost to herself. "If it's testing us, it'll come nearer. It wants to see how we respond." The captain glanced at her. Hearing the certainty in her tone, he had flown for decades. But this woman's voice carried something heavier. Something trained. He trusted her instantly. She pulled out the seat beside the first officer and sat. Her hands hovered near the controls, not touching yet. But her body already fell back into the posture she once had. She was no longer the silent passenger from row 10. She was a pilot again, even without the uniform. The captain explained quickly. "We've alerted ground control, but they're minutes behind. We need to act before it gets too close." She nodded. "Then we control the space. We don't panic. We show we're ready." Her voice was steady, her breathing calm. It reminded the crew that fear had no place here. Only focus. Outside the window, the sky was endless blue, but hidden somewhere in that horizon was the unknown object. The passengers saw nothing, but inside the cockpit, every eye was locked on the blinking radar. The first officer asked, "What if it's not hostile? What if it's lost?" The young woman turned her head slightly and answered, "Then we guide it away. But if it isn't lost, if it's here for us, we prepare for the worst." Her words left no room for comfort, only clarity. That clarity steadied the captain. He adjusted his headset and prepared to follow her lead. Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers noticed the turbulence increasing slightly. A child asked her mother why the plane felt like it was moving differently. The mother smiled weakly and said it was nothing, though her eyes kept glancing forward, hoping for reassurance that never came. The young woman leaned forward, her voice lower now. "If it comes into direct path, we have two choices, evade or confront. But this aircraft isn't built for combat, so our best weapon is control and calm movement." The captain nodded. "Then we'll rely on you." She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the radar. The dot shifted again, closer, sharper, faster. Her body reacted before her mind formed words. Her muscles tensed like a spring ready to launch. Memories rushed through her. Nights when alarms blared in her ears. When the sky lit with streaks of fire. When every second carried the weight of life or death. She had promised herself she was done with that life. But fate had pulled her back, and now once again, she was the difference between safety and disaster. In row 10, her empty seat sat quietly. The window still showed the clouds rolling outside. To the passengers, she had disappeared into mystery, but soon they would learn why the captain had called and why she could never remain just a silent traveler. The radar beeped steadily, the strange dot pulsing closer each time. The young woman leaned in, her eyes sharp, her body remembering every drill she had ever lived through. The captain and first officer watched her, waiting for her call. She wasn't in uniform, but her presence filled the cockpit with authority. She raised her hand slightly, maintained current speed. "Don't show panic, let it approach, we'll see its intention." Her voice was calm, but inside her chest her heart was preparing for the unknown. She had faced enemies before, but never like this. On a commercial plane filled with families, children, and people who didn't even know danger was in the sky. The first officer adjusted the controls. Steadying the aircraft, his jaw tightened. "It's too close already," he muttered. But she shook her head. No sudden moves. "We don't want to look like prey." The captain glanced at her. His brow furrowed. "You've done this before, haven't you?" She met his eyes for a brief second, and though she said nothing, the silence answered everything. He understood she wasn't just trained, she was tested. Outside, the horizon shimmered. Clouds stretched endlessly, peaceful and white. But hidden somewhere out there was the unknown craft. The passengers still had no idea. Some laughed softly, some dozed, some flipped through magazines. Only a handful sensed something unusual. The slight changes in the plane's path. The tension in the flight attendants' faces. In row 9, a teenager whispered to his father, "Why did the captain ask for pilots earlier?" The father smiled tightly, trying to dismiss it. "Probably just a precaution." But his eyes didn't match his words. He kept looking at the front. As if expecting something, back in the cockpit, the dot shifted again, faster this time. The young woman leaned forward, her breath steady. "Here it comes," she said quietly. The radar blinked, then steadied. The object was now close enough to be seen on the horizon. Through the cockpit glass, a dark shape appeared in the distance. It was small, sharp, moving with unnatural speed. The captain's hands tightened on the controls. "What is that?" he whispered. The first officer shook his head, unable to name it. The young woman's eyes narrowed, studying its movement. "It's not flying like a passenger plane, it's probing. Testing our reaction." Her voice was firm. She knew this behavior, she had seen it before. The captain asked the question no one wanted. "Hostile?" She didn't answer right away. She watched carefully, letting the silence stretch, then finally said, "If it was friendly, it would have answered by now." The first officer looked pale. "What do we do?" The young woman's voice cut through the fear. "We stay calm but prepare, keep our altitude steady. Don't let it box us in." The object moved again. A sharp curve to the left, then back, circling slightly. It was like a predator circling prey. The young woman's body tensed, ready to act. She gripped the arm of the seat, feeling the vibrations through the metal. The memories of combat filled her. Radio calls, engines screaming. Skies filled with uncertainty. In the cabin, a flight attendant tried to keep passengers calm. She walked down the aisle with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything is fine, ladies and gentlemen. Please remain seated," she said softly. But whispers had already spread. Fear always found a way. Row 10 sat empty, and passengers near it kept glancing at the seat, wondering why the woman who once sat there had gone forward. None of them knew she was now the silent shield standing between them and the unknown. The captain looked at her again. "If it attacks?" She turned her head slowly, her eyes sharp. "Then we fight in the only way we can, by outthinking it, not outrunning it." Her words carried the steel of someone who had lived through storms before. The dot moved closer. The shape outside grew clearer. Its shadow crossed the sunlight briefly. Dark against the clouds, the first officer whispered. "It's right on us." The young woman leaned forward, her voice low but powerful. "Then this is where we hold. This is where we show it we're not afraid." The cockpit was silent, except for the steady hum of engines and the beeping radar. In that moment, the plane was more than metal and passengers. It was a battlefield of willpower, and the quiet woman from row 10 had once again become the fighter the sky demanded. The object outside grew larger, its dark outline breaking against the soft white clouds. The passengers couldn't see it clearly yet, but the cockpit crew knew they were no longer alone in the sky. The young woman leaned forward, her eyes sharp, her body alert like it had been trained to be long ago. The captain's knuckles tightened on the controls. "It's right there. What is it doing?" The first officer's voice cracked. "It's pacing us." The radar confirmed the truth. Every shift the plane made, the object matched like a shadow. The young woman spoke firmly. "It's testing boundaries. It wants to know how we react. If we panic, it wins. If we stay steady, we control the game." Her calm tone steadied the cockpit. The crew leaned into her words like a rope in stormy waters. She glanced at the captain. "Slow our climb slightly. Make it look like we're steady but cautious." He obeyed, adjusting the controls with care. Outside, the object responded, shifting closer, almost daring them to make the wrong move. In the cabin, whispers grew louder. A man in row 12 pressed his face to the window. "There's something out there," he whispered harshly to his seatmate. A woman further back began to pray softly under her breath. The flight attendants moved quickly, trying to soothe passengers with gentle smiles, but their eyes flicked nervously to the windows too. The young woman kept her gaze forward. "It's not random," she said quietly. "It's calculated." The captain frowned. "You mean it knows us?" She nodded slowly. "It knows enough to test us. That makes it dangerous." For a moment, silence filled the cockpit except for the steady hum of engines. Then the object suddenly tilted, darting across the horizon with unnatural speed. It circled once, twice before locking back onto their path. The first officer swore under his breath. "That's no normal aircraft," the young woman's voice cut in. Calm and sure. "Then we treat it like an adversary. We don't look away, we don't flinch." Her words carried weight, the kind of weight that comes from someone who had faced skies filled with fire before. She leaned slightly forward, her muscles tight, remembering old lessons. "If it wants to intimidate us, it will try to force close passes. Be ready." As if hearing her, the object swooped closer, its dark frame flashing briefly in the sunlight. Passengers near the windows gasped, pointing. Fear spread like electricity down the aisles. Children clutched their parents. Some covered their eyes in row 9. The teenager from before whispered, "That's not a plane." "Dad," his father didn't answer. His lips pressed tightly, his eyes fixed forward. He knew now this was no ordinary flight. The cockpit shook as the object streaked past, so close that the plane rattled. The passengers screamed. The young woman gripped the side of her seat, but her voice stayed steady. "Hold altitude. Don't give it the reaction it wants," the captain's voice cracked. "It almost hit us," she shook her head firmly. "No, it missed on purpose. It's showing power." The radar blinked again, the object looping back into view. The young woman's voice dropped lower. "This is the point where it decides. Either it leaves or it pushes harder. We have to be ready for both." The captain swallowed. "And if it pushes?" Her eyes narrowed, her voice cutting like steel. "Then we remind it we're not helpless even without weapons. Control is our weapon." She turned back to the radar, her mind racing through tactics she had once sworn she'd never need again. Evasive patterns, defensive maneuvers, ways to outthink an opponent who moved faster. She had practiced these countless times in the past. Only now she was doing it in a plane filled with innocence. In the cabin, fear turned to chaos. Some passengers stood despite the seatbelt sign. Voices rose. People begged the attendants for answers. "What's happening? Are we safe? What is that thing?" The attendants pleaded for calm, but their own trembling hands betrayed the truth. They were just as afraid. The young woman turned back to the captain, her voice firm. "We need to prepare the cabin. Tell them nothing more than necessary. But keep them seated and secure if this turns rough. They need to be ready." The captain nodded and called back to the lead attendant. His words were calm, but his eyes betrayed the weight of the moment. The young woman breathed slowly, her mind balancing two worlds: the quiet seat she had once occupied in row 10, and the fighter she had become again in the cockpit. She didn't want this, but fate had chosen for her. The object outside drew closer once more, moving in sharp, deliberate arcs, like a predator circling before the strike. She leaned forward, her voice a whisper now. "It's not done yet," and in that silence, as the passengers clutched each other, as the crew held their breath, the quiet woman from row 10 prepared for the moment she had spent her whole life training for. The moment when the sky itself demanded her return. The object outside circled again, faster now, as if daring the plane to break formation. The passengers gripped their armrests, whispers rising into shouts. Fear had become a living thing inside the cabin, spreading from row to row like a fire without flame. In the cockpit, the young woman sat steady, her breathing controlled, her eyes locked on the radar. She felt the shift in the air, the weight of every second stretching tighter. She leaned forward and spoke to the captain. "It's going to make another pass. This time closer." The captain's jaw clenched, sweat beating at his temple. "How close can we hold without risking a collision?" She didn't look away from the screen. "Close enough to scare them back, but not close enough to panic our people." The first officer's voice cracked. "Our people? You mean the passengers?" She nodded, her voice low. "They're not just passengers anymore, they're our responsibility. And we're their shield." Her words steadied the room, reminding the crew that this was more than just a technical problem. It was about the lives behind them, the families in the seats, the children sleeping in the back rows. Outside, the shape darted across the wing, its shadow sweeping over the plane like a predator's claw. Gasps and cries echoed through the cabin. The attendants rushed to calm everyone, but fear pressed heavier than words. The young woman lifted her hand. "Hold steady, don't chase it. Let it show its move first," the captain obeyed, his fingers trembling only slightly on the controls. The radar beeped again, the dots slicing across their path, closer, sharper. The plane jolted as turbulence struck. A tray tumbled in row 14, coffee spilling across the floor. A child began to cry and soon others joined. Their voices blended with the low hum of engines, creating a sound that pressed into every heart. The young woman closed her eyes briefly, remembering nights when alarms screamed in her ears, when the ground shook with fire, when her squad had trusted her to stay calm when no one else could. She inhaled deeply, opening her eyes again. It wants fear. Don't give it fear, the captain nodded, trying to borrow her calmness. What if it doesn't back down? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him, steady and unshaken. Then we outlast it. We show it that we won't break. Suddenly, the object shot upward, disappearing into the glare of the sun. For a moment, the radar blinked empty. The first officer exhaled heavily. Is it gone? But she shook her head slowly. No, it's repositioning. This isn't finished. Seconds later, the dot reappeared, this time dropping in from above. The cockpit trembled as the shadow streaked past. Closer than ever, the passengers screamed again. Panic boiling now, flight attendants shouted for everyone to stay seated, their voices shaking but urgent. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm but strained. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and calm. Everything is under control. But the passengers could hear it, the small crack in his voice that betrayed the truth. In the cockpit, the young woman pressed her palm against the console, her muscles tense. It's trying to break us, to push us into a mistake, the first officer snapped. Then what do? She leaned closer, her tone fierce. We flip the script. We stop reacting and start leading. Her eyes locked on the radar, her mind racing. Adjust course slightly. Just 3 degrees east, make it think we're shifting. But only enough to test its response, the captain obeyed. The plane shifting just slightly. The passengers barely noticed, but the object did. It darted to match, proving what she suspected. It was watching every move. Her lips pressed thin. Good, now we know. It won't leave us alone unless we force its hand. The captain's breath grew heavy. Force its hand? How? She turned to him, her voice a whisper of steel. We remind it that we are not prey. We hold our line and we make it choose, back off. Or risk collision. The first officer's eyes widened. That's insane. This isn't a fighter jet. This is full of people. The young woman's eyes stayed calm. And that's why it will work. Because we cannot afford to break, and it knows that outside. The object looped back, faster, sharper. The tension in the cockpit was like a wire pulled to its limit. The passengers braced themselves as the shadow swept across the windows again. The young woman leaned forward, her voice calm but final. Hold steady, don't move. This is the moment it decides. The radar beeped, the engines roared, and every heart on the plane seemed to stop. In that instant, the quiet woman from row 10 was no longer just a traveler. She was the wall between panic and survival. And as the object dove once more, everyone held their breath, waiting for the sky to reveal what came next. The object dove hard, its shadow racing across the cabin windows. Passengers screamed, bracing themselves. The plane trembled under the sudden shift of air. The young woman in the cockpit did not flinch. Her eyes stayed fixed on the radar, her body steady like stone. Hold your line, she said firmly. Her voice cut through the fear. The captain's hands gripped the controls tighter. Sweat dripping down his face, the first officer muttered, It's coming too close, but she shook her head. No, it's bluffing. Don't give it what it wants. The object streaked past, so close that the tail of the plane rattled. Luggage shifted overhead, a bag dropped, a child cried out. But still the young woman's voice stayed calm. Steady, steady. It will make its choice now. The passengers clung to each other. Some prayed, some wept silently, others simply stared wide-eyed at the windows. No one knew what the dark shape wanted, only that their fate seemed to hang in its shadow. The object circled again, slower this time, as if reconsidering. The young woman leaned closer to the glass, her jaw set. It's testing resolve. That's all. If we break, it wins. If we hold, it leaves, the captain whispered. And if you're wrong? She turned her head, her voice low but certain. Then at least we face it with courage, not fear. The silence in the cockpit was heavy, only the steady beep of the radar filling the space. Then, without warning, the object darted upward. Climbing fast into the sky, the radar blinked and blinked, then cleared. The dot was gone. The first officer let out a shaky laugh of disbelief. It's leaving. It's actually leaving. The captain's hands trembled as he loosened his grip. It's gone, he whispered, His voice carried relief so heavy it nearly broke. The young woman closed her eyes for a moment. Exhaling slowly, her body relaxed against the seat. But her heart still pounded. She had faced danger many times before, but this was different. This was not a mission she had signed up for. This was fate dragging her back into the fire. In the cabin, the tension broke like a wave. Some passengers cheered, others wept openly, hugging strangers. A woman clutched her child tightly, whispering thanks under her breath. The flight attendants moved down the aisle. Their voices softer now, reassuring. It's over. Everything is fine. Row 10 sat empty. Its quiet seat holding the memory of the woman who had once rested there with her head against the window. The other passengers whispered about her now. She went to the cockpit. She saved us, and who is she? The captain turned to her, his voice soft but filled with gratitude. I don't know who you are, but today, you were exactly who we needed. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the window, to the sky that had called her back when she least expected it. Finally, she stood, adjusting her simple jacket. I was just a passenger, she said quietly. But sometimes the sky doesn't let you stay that way. She left the cockpit slowly. Walking back into the cabin, passengers turned their heads, their eyes wide with admiration and relief. Some clapped softly, others just watched in silence. She gave no speech, no smile. She simply returned to row 10, sat down, and leaned once more against the window. Her body was tired, but her heart was steady. She had answered the call once again, not for glory, not for recognition, but because lives had needed her. The plane flew on, the engines humming softly. The sky looked peaceful again, as if nothing had ever happened. But everyone on board knew the truth. Peace was only possible because one quiet woman in row 10 had stood when the captain called. Hours later, when the plane landed safely, passengers stepped off into the terminal with relief. Some looked back one last time, searching for the woman who had saved them. But she moved quietly, blending into the crowd. No name, no story shared, only the memory of calm eyes and a steady voice in the storm. And somewhere in the endless sky above, the echo of her past still lingered, reminding her that no matter how far she traveled, no matter how quietly she wished to live, the sky would always know her name,